The next part of the brain that we are going to study is the cerebellum. It is the second largest part of the brain. It is present in the hindbrain, so we are going to get briefly introduced to the cerebellum and a few of the functions that it performs that we are going to see in this lesson. Now, first of all, as I told you that it is the second largest part of the brain. First one is cerebrum, the second one is cerebellum. Like cerebrum, it also has two hemispheres. We know that there are two cerebral hemispheres, so the cerebellum also has two hemispheres. So, let us see what are the characteristic features of cerebellum which we have to remember by heart. First thing is that it is the second largest part of the brain. First being the cerebrum, second is cerebellum. So, you can associate it is quite easy to cram. Second thing you have to remember that it is known as little cerebrum. Alright, that could be because it is having a similar structure as of cerebrum. It is having two hemispheres as in the case of cerebrum. We know that cerebrum had two hemispheres. Here also we find two hemispheres, cerebral hemispheres. Then there is another thing that this cerebrum has a conscious control and the cerebellum has the unconscious control, which is responsible for maintaining the body postures and body movements, that you have to remember. Now the third thing that we get across is that the grey matter of the cerebellum is similar to that of cerebrum, because in cerebrum also we have grey matter which is located outside and white matter inside. Here also the grey matter is present outside while the white matter is present inside. Now this grey matter is divided into three layers of cells and fibers. Now these three layers, what is the characteristic composition of this that we need not to get into in detail. What we have to remember is that there are characteristic cells known as Purkinje cells. Now as we are talking about brain, first thing that there won't be any other cells except for neurons. So these Purkinje cells are present in the second layer of the grey matter, because there were three layers. The second layer is going to have Purkinje cells, and these cells, need not to say they would be neurons. What sort of neurons they would be? They would be flask shaped, tree-like, with numerous dendrites. And I must tell you one thing, that these Purkinje cells are one of the most complex neurons which are present in our brain. Very complex neurons. The dendrites are so many that it looks like a tree, like this. Supposedly this is the axon and there would be so many neurons, dendrites out of a neuron. This entire would be a Purkinje cell and it gives a tree-like appearance, and it is somewhat flask shaped. So as I have mentioned, you can picturize what Purkinje cells would look like. Also we do mention about Purkinje cells when we study about nervous system, neurons, that these are the most complex neuron, and where they are found in cerebellum. Now in the cerebellum, apart from the functions which are quite important, there are cerebral peduncles which are present, and these are nothing but they are connections between different parts of the brain and the cerebellum itself, not cerebrum. Now what are cerebral peduncles? They are the three paired bundles. Now as there were three layers of the grey matter, here also the peduncles are three in number. First thing you have to remember that they are three in number and they are made up of myelinated nerve fibers. Now try to recall your knowledge from the nervous tissue, what is myelinated and what is non-myelinated, what would be this myelinated making grey matter or white matter. So these peduncles are formed of myelinated nerve fibers which act for the communication pathways between cerebellum and other parts of CNS. So basically these peduncles, as I told you, that they would be some sort of connection between different parts of the brain. So what each cerebral peduncle would be named as and what would be the connection that it would be forming? There would be three cerebral peduncles: superior, middle and inferior. You can make it out like supposedly this is the human brain. Over here we are having the cerebellum that is wedged into the thalamus and the brainstem. Basically the cerebellum is wedged into that brainstem thing. It makes its place over there. It looks something like this. This is what cerebellum looks like. Like supposedly this is the brainstem. It is also known as arbor vitae. The name is used that it is tree-like structure. Okay. We will come to that when we see the diagrammatic representation, but for now you have to remember that the superior cerebral peduncle is responsible for connecting the cerebellum, that is part of hindbrain, to the midbrain, that would be brainstem of course. So this superior one that is present, now supposedly I am talking about, this is the anterior part of the brain, this is the posterior part of the brain, this would have forebrain over here, this would have spinal cord over here. So the peduncle which would be towards the forebrain, that would be superior cerebral peduncle, and it would of course connect the cerebellum with the part which is anterior, and that part would be midbrain. Now the second one is middle cerebral peduncle. It is responsible for communication with pons. Now this cerebellum has to get connected with pons varoli as well as the medulla oblongata. So the middle cerebral peduncle is responsible for the communication of the cerebellum, both the hemispheres, with pons varoli. That is the purpose of middle cerebral peduncle. Now comes the inferior cerebral peduncle, that goes most posterior. Now to the most posterior side, we have medulla oblongata and spinal cord. As we have seen over here, this was the anterior part. That means supposedly you consider my brain. This is the anterior part, the lower side would be posterior part. So the anterior part had the midbrain, because this entire cerebellum is part of hindbrain. So the immediate anterior part would be midbrain. So that was connected by superior peduncle. Then comes the middle one that connects it to the sideways lying pons varoli, and the last one is inferior, which would be connecting the cerebellum with the most posterior part, that is medulla oblongata, as well as the spinal cord. So this is the role of the peduncles which are present in the cerebellum. Yet again I use the wrong word. Now coming to the functions, we are talking about cerebellum over here. So in case I have missed and used the word cerebrum, just try to correct it in your mind that it won't be cerebrum that we would be talking about. We would be talking about cerebrum only in the terms that cerebellum resembles cerebrum a lot. What are the functions of cerebellum? First of all, it modulates and reorganizes motor commands. Now in this point you have to remember one thing, that this cerebellum does not initiate the movement. One thing, it does not initiate the movement, but instead it modulates or reorganizes the motor commands which are coming from the cerebrum over here. Now next function is, it is vital for controlling rapid muscular activities like running, talking, etc. Now whatever I am doing this in lesson, I am moving my hands, that is under the control of cerebellum, and that is involuntary control, that you have to remember, because all the activities which are performed by cerebellum are involuntary. Alright. Now the next thing that you have to remember is, in the functions of cerebellum itself, that the cerebellum has the involuntary control. The voluntary control, whichever has to be taken off, that is in the hands of cerebrum. So the cerebrum's voluntary control, I told you in the beginning as well, it is the voluntary control of cerebrum and the involuntary control of cerebellum, which is responsible for carrying out the activities, especially the motor commands, and the modulation and the regulation is to be taken care by cerebellum. So this is all about cerebellum that we talk about. Next we are going to deal with the small parts of the brain like thalamus and corpus striatum, that we are going to see in the next lesson.